Okay, good morning, everyone. This week we will go through Parashat Bo. It's also this week is Tu B'Shvat, Bezrat Hashem. So I hope you're getting your fruits, different types of fruits and vegetables ready. It's a fun time. They say that when Tu B'Shvat comes around, it's the end of the winter time, but I don't know if I believe that anymore. Anyway, it's an exciting week. Tu B'Shvat, it's a symbol of renewal with the new year of the trees, and Bezrat Hashem, it should be a new season and a new year for all of us in good health. Parashat Bo begins with picking up from the 8th plague. So there are 10 plagues in Egypt. Last week's Parashat Vayera, had 7 of them. Now we pick up from number 8, and number 8 is going to be locusts. There's a very interesting discussion that goes back and forth between Moshe and Pharaoh, where Moshe says, we're going to go, and we can't stay here. We're going to leave and bring our korbanot and serve outside of Egypt. And Pharaoh says, okay, you want to go serve Hashem, so go. Who you need to serve Hashem? Go to Kanisa. Go pray. You don't want to do it in Egypt, so you want to go outside? Fine. But who's going to go? Let the men go. And Moshe says, it's not how it works. We're going to go with men, women, young, old, children, animals, cows, sheep. We're going. And Pharaoh says, I don't know. If you want to go serve him, so let the men go. Let the men go and serve Hashem. Why do you need everyone to go? And Pharaoh says no. Moshe says no. So there's a standoff. And then we're hit with Egypt is hit with the next plague, the plague of locusts. And I think if you take a step back, you could say how perhaps this is just a negotiating tactic, right? Pharaoh saying, here, I'll give you half. And Moshe says, no, I want more. And they don't come to an agreement. There is a level deeper here in terms of how our Torah and how Moshe and how Yahadut believes the service of Hashem is. The service of Hashem is not done just with the men, just in the Bet Knesset. That's not how it works. That's perhaps how some perceive it. But Pharaoh says, let the men go. And Moshe's response is, what about the women? What about the children? They also need to serve Hashem. So at a higher level, obviously we wanted everyone to leave. But at a deeper level, it's more than just Moshe trying to get everyone out. It's Moshe's actually responding to Pharaoh's claim that to serve Hashem is just men. That's not true. To serve men, you need everyone. You need men, women, older people, younger people, all generations, children, everyone. This is how our Torah believes, because everyone serves Hashem in their own respective way, at their own respective time, in their own respective place. To say that in the Bet Knesset is a service of Hashem, but outside is not, that's incorrect. Someone is in the office, someone is in school, someone is in college, someone is wherever they are, whoever they are, whatever stage they are, they could be serving Hashem in their own respective ways. So it's a very meta way, or a second way to understand this conversation between Moshe and Pharaoh. There's locusts come, the locusts swarm and eat whatever food is left, which is extremely dangerous because there already is no food left in Egypt after previous plagues of hail. So it's really dangerous. And Pharaoh turns to Moshe and says, we sin to you, we sin to God, you need to leave, right? Please forgive me. Pray to God, and take this death away from me. Meaning the locust drove Pharaoh to asking for forgiveness, saying, go pray to your God, get rid of this. And that's what happened. We get to the plague at the end of the plague of locusts, Pharaoh says that he'll let us go, but it just doesn't work. So he changes his mind and he won't let us go. There's the plague of Chodesh. Chodesh is darkness. That, the Torah tells us, lasted 3 days. The commentators explain, or Chachamim explain that it lasted longer, but in a simple sense, it lasted 3 days. And it was a very, very thick fog darkness. I believe that even Ezra explains it as like if someone is traveling at sea, they could sense the darkness because it's so dense and in the air. Like this was a very, very dense fog, so much so that they almost couldn't move. Like that's the way Chachamim explained. But it could be felt. And They couldn't see for a few days. They weren't able to move, but the Jewish people had light, which is fascinating. In the same country, Jewish people had light and the Egyptians did not. That's the Makat Choshech. Now we get to a very heated debate between Moshe and Paro. Oof, it's amazing. Again, Paro says go, and Moshe says, okay, we'll go. And Paro says, just go without your animals. Take your men, women, children, whatever, but just leave your animals here. And Moshe says, no, we're taking our animals with us. And not just that, Lo tisher parsa, and not just that, we don't know how we're going to be serving Hashem when we go outside. We need the animals. And you know what? Gam ata titen bi'adenu zebachim ve'olot. And actually, you're going to provide some animals to us also. So now Moshe is just like, having fun with Paro by saying, not only are we taking your animals, but I was actually hoping you could give us some of yours. Paro gets upset. Paro says, don't walk in here again. If you walk in here again, I'll kill you. I'll kill you. It's the first time we see a threat from Paro to take Moshe's life. We haven't seen that. You could ask the question as to why not. Moshe's response is, you got it, sir. I will not be back. I will not come back. But just one thing I want to let you know before I go. Odnega achad avi al Paro. Hashem tells him, there will be one last plague. After this darkness, there will be one last plague. In every home, the firstborn will die. In your home, Paro, and even in the prison cells, all the way from top to bottom, there will not be a home without a death on this night. And the firstborns will die. And Moshe says, and when you see what happens, you'll come back running to me. Your servants will come back running to me, bowing down to me, asking us to leave. This is how you chose to do this, Paro. And they leave, and that's it. And the Torah says something very interesting. The Egyptians respected the Jewish people at this point. Moshe, the man Moshe, was very well respected in the land of Egypt. It almost sounds like the Egyptians have already accepted that Moshe is a powerful man and it's time for them to go, like give them their independence. But Paro is the one who's holding on. Paro is the one who won't let go. In the eyes of the servants of Paro and in the eyes of the people, Moshe is a great man. He's very well respected, but Paro doesn't budge. So we then have the warning of the firstborn dying on that night when we are going to leave. And now we take a pause. The pause from the conversation between Moshe and Paro, and Hashem now starts giving mitzvot to the Jewish people. This is the first mitzvah that we receive as a nation. We have received many mitzvot in the past. For example, Abraham received Brit Milah, and Adam HaRishon received some laws, and Noach received some laws, not to murder, for example. And Yaakov received some laws, the children of Yaakov not to eat the sciatic nerve of an animal. But now is the first time that the entire Am Yisrael is commanded in a mitzvah. And what is it? It's the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. This is really two parts. Number one, the month that they're leaving Egypt will be the first month of the year. So what month do they leave Egypt? The month that we call Nisan. That is going to be the first month of the year. So if someone asks you, what is the first month of the Jewish calendar? The answer is Nisan. Why? Because that's the month we left in Egypt, and that's what our first mitzvah is. In addition to that, there's also a mitzvah for the courts and the Jewish people to establish when is the beginning of the month based on the cycles of the moon. The cycles of the moon are approximately 29 and a half days. If you want to know how much is a month, it's approximately, not exactly, approximately 29 and a half days. Practically speaking, if a month is 29 and a half days, that means half the months have to be 29 days and half the months have to be 30 days. The courts have the right to establish, based on the moon, but the courts have the right to establish this month is going to be 29 days. This month is going to be 30 days, which really means we have the jurisdiction to decide when Rosh Chodesh will be. And consequently, we decide when will Rosh Hashanah be, when will Yom Kippur be, when will Sukkot be. It's pretty amazing. Hashem tells us when Shabbat is, it's the seventh day of the week. But we tell Hashem when all of the Chagim are, because we, the courts, establish what is the first day of the month, and which establishes the entire calendar. That is the mitzvah in this parasha. So in addition to that, we now start learning about the law of Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach means, in the context of that year, they had to bring a sheep or a goat as a sacrifice on the night that before they were going to leave Egypt. They had this animal prepared from beforehand, a few days beforehand. They did shechita. They took the blood and they put it on their doorposts, the top of the door, the sides of the door. And they had intention to eat it on that night. Before they left Egypt, they had to eat the meat of this goat or sheep. Korban Pesach is what it's called, together with matzot and mirorim. When we say al matzot u'mirorim yocheluhu on the night of Pesach, said that you take your matzah and your kahu, your maror, your lettuce, and you ice cream scoop up the charoset, and you put it all together. There's a piece missing. Really, what should be in there is Korban Pesach, a piece of either meat, of goat or sheep. If there's no Beit HaMikdash, we don't do this. Discussion for another time why we don't do this nowadays. But in its ideal state, and when they left Egypt, they had a sandwich with the meat in the middle of the goat and sheep, or sheep. And there's some laws, details we learn about the Korban Pesach, which are really very interesting. How it has to be eaten, how it has to be cooked. Really beautiful halachot. And the Torah says that when you place blood on your doorpost, ufasachti alachem, Hashem says, and I will, a verb, livsoach, pasachti, I will be pasach, over you. Now this is the word Pesach. What does it mean? So the way that it's translated is Passover. In other words, Hashem will go through all of the streets and it comes to this house and he's going to kill the firstborn, but if there's blood on the doorpost, he'll pass over it. That's the common way it's understood. But it also could mean, and if you look at Rashi, look at Onkelos, Pasach could also mean to protect. Ufasachti alechem ve'echos alechon. It could mean, and as Rashi also says, ve'chamalti, I'll have mercy on you. It could also mean how Hashem will protect whoever's in his home. In other words, there will be the plague of the firstborn going through the entire town, the entire country, and whoever has blood on the doorpost, Hashem will protect that door. Not that Hashem is the one killing and will jump over, but that Hashem is the one who will protect the people in the home from the plague. So that's another way. In this way, this year you could say, what are you doing for Passover? Or you could say, what are you doing for, I don't know, plague protection? It actually would make a lot of sense this year. Unfortunately, we're living within a plague. So this is what the word Pasachti might mean. I think kosher for Passover sounds like a better ring than kosher for plague protection. So we have this section. It ends. We then have to do the action of putting the blood on the doorpost. Also, there's some additional details that you have to eat matzah on that night. You can't eat chametz. We learn about that. You cannot cook on the day of Pesach unless it's you cannot do any actions other than cooking for the day. All of that we learn in this parasha, how you'd be allowed to cook on that day, but you can't cook for afterwards. You can't do other prohibited actions. So we're really learning laws as a nation. This is the beginning of learning laws as a nation. It's pretty amazing. All right, then we go to the section of it is midnight, and at midnight or around midnight, the firstborns are killed. Every home in Egypt is crying. There's cries and screams coming out of every home. Pharaoh gets up in the middle of the night, and he calls to Moshe and Aaron. He says, "Go, go, kumu tzom mitochami, get out of here. Gam atem, gam bnei Israel, you, the Jewish people, go do whatever you want. Gam tzonechem, gam becharchem kilchu. Take your sheep, take your cows, take your animals." This was all building up as part of the negotiation. Take all of them, uveraftem gamoti, and please pray for me also. Wherever you're going, I need the prayers. Pharaoh tells Moshe, pray for me, go. Now the people wanted to go, and they were getting rushed out, so they didn't even have time to make any food to go. So they quickly took some flour and water, and they put it together. They threw it on their shoulders. This is where the concept of matzah comes. So there wasn't any time as they were leaving. There was no time for it to rise. They couldn't make bread. They just, they took whatever they can from the pantry, picked some flour, water, and then let's go. We have to leave. And as they were going, they knew they were going. The Egyptians knew that they were going, and the Egyptians sent them off with gifts. The Jewish people asked for gifts. The Egyptians sent their gifts with them because they understood that this was the nation of God. They understood that they were correct. We already established Pharaoh was the only one who was holding out, but everyone else understood that this was something special. And so they said, yes, take it. You're holy people, you're powerful people, take it. They gave their money, they gave their gold, jewelry, whatever it may be. They leave Egypt. They're eating matzah because there wasn't enough time for it to rise. This is amazing. This is what we're learning the sections of Pesach that we read on the night of the Seder. And then the Torah tells us a little bit more details of that night, how to eat the Korban Pesach. If someone doesn't have a Brit Milah, cannot eat from it, so they would have to, someone wanted to eat from the Korban Pesach, they'd have to have a Brit Milah, some additional details there about how to eat it. When you eat the animal, you shouldn't break any bones. Again, there's a lot to discuss on the details of the Korban Pesach. That's discussed in this parasha. And then we get to the section of Kadesh Li. Some of the men who put on tefillin in the room might be familiar with Kadesh Li. And even also some of the women from the last section of this parasha. The tefillin box has 4 compartments. 2 of those compartments are from the last 2 sections of our parasha. It's the sections of Kadesh Li and V'haya Ki Aviyacha. What are these sections about? Essentially, since the Egyptian firstborns died, Hashem said, in order to commemorate this, or to remember this for the rest of history, I want you to sanctify your firstborns, both men and women, meaning both humans and animals. So how does that manifest itself? There's going to be a mitzvah called Pidyon HaBen. If a man and woman have a firstborn child that's firstborn to the mother, born naturally, they need to go through a process called Pidyon HaBen, which they essentially purchase the child, or they exchange the money for the child so as to commemorate how firstborns in Egypt died. And our firstborns, we remember that Hashem kept safe, and we do that by doing this mitzvah Pidyon HaBen. Also, firstborn animals, you have to go through a process. It's called Bechor. You have to bring korbanot. Firstborn donkey. There's all sorts of laws that have to be done for firstborns. And then the Torah tells us, and I also want you to remember on the night of Pesach, on the night of Pesach, every year throughout history, I want you to go through this story and tell your children exactly what happened. Education is at the forefront of the values of the Torah. You have to teach your children what happened and tell them how we went out of Egypt. And I want you to write it on your arm. I want you to write it on your head. That's the mitzvah of tefillin. I want you to remember the episode of Yetziat Mitzrayim for the rest of your lives, because you're going to go in Israel one day. When you go in Israel, I don't want you to forget where you came from. And there will be a time in the future your children are going to ask, what are you doing? Why do you eat matzah? Why do you have this Pesach? Why do you have maror? Why do you wear tefillin? And tell your children what happened. Tell your children that we were slaves in Egypt and Hashem brought us out, and commemorate that every day, but specifically on the night of Pesach. That's how our parsha ends, with the mitzvah of tefillin, that you have to put on the tefillin, which, as I said, writes these 2 sections on your arm and on your head. All right, that is the parsha. We'll now open it up for questions. There's so much we could delve into, but I will now pause, allow people to ask questions either in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask away. Joey, I see you, but I don't hear you.
That's because I wasn't talking yet. But
okay, go ahead.
So this is kind of a broad question. Maybe you covered it 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure. Is there a reason the Torah doesn't really cover much of Moshe Rabbeinu's childhood? It kind of fast forwards through it. It talks about a couple of incidents of when he stood up for one of the Jews, and he killed an Egyptian, and then he ran away. But we don't know really anything about his like character development aside from the couple of incidents. So I don't know, it kind of left me a little bit puzzled when I was following along in the Torah, and then it just kind of takes off from his adulthood. I mean, he's the most consequential man in our religion, except maybe, I don't know, Abraham, but I just thought there would be more to him as a younger person than as a prophet.
Yeah, that is a wonderful question, Joy. I really like the question, and you even brought the comparison to Abraham Avinu. So your question is, how come we don't know the making of Moshe Rabbeinu? Like, show us him in his college days. Like, what was he like, and how did he grow up? How did he become who he was, or in his formative years as a child? I'll extend your question to Abraham Avinu also. You mentioned Abraham. When are we introduced to Abraham in the Torah? When he's 75 years old. The Torah says Abraham is 75 years old, and Hashem tells him, go to a land I'll show you. He's 75. Who was he? What's his background? How did he become the man that Hashem chose? So I think there's an answer that you could share for both of them. But incidentally, I think for Moshe, there are some key details the Torah is telling us. So I'll first share one or two details of what the Torah tells us about Moshe, which are important in his formative years. Number one, there is that story when he is still an Egyptian. He is living as an Egyptian, and it says that he goes out to see his brothers. So he sees the pain of his brothers. That's number one, that we don't necessarily know how, but he identifies himself as brothers of these people. So you see how there must have been some knowledge of who he was, right? That could be because we also know that Yocheved was the one who nursed him. The way things played out, as amazing as Hashem runs the world, was the daughter of Pharaoh went against the decree of her father to save this child and handed this child back to its mother to nurse it. Eventually, she brought him back, but we don't know how old he was. Maybe he was 3 years old, maybe he was 4, maybe she kept him longer. We don't really know. And also, maybe at that young stage, she was able to educate him. Maybe he knew who Aaron was, he knew who Miriam was, so he still had conversations with them. So we know that he was raised by his own mom, at least for the first couple of years. We know that he went out one day and he saw people hurting the Jewish people, and he saw an Egyptian hurting a Jew, and he was connected to them, and he defended the Jew, so he felt that connection. We also know that he went out and he saw 2 Jewish people beating each other, or one of them was beating another, and he stood up against it. So we see that he would do things to defend people who were being beaten by the Egyptian. He stood up to defend them. There was a Jew beating another Jew. He stood up to defend them. And then when he runs away from Egypt and he sees the daughters of Yitro by the well, and they're getting mistreated, he stands up to defend them. So we do get a glimpse into the type of character he was. He wanted things to be, when things weren't correct, he stood up. And then there's the story of him by the burning bush, where the Torah tells us that he saw the bush was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. And he says, I have to go see what's going on. And you see there is this sense of curiosity, the sense of not letting things that don't make sense just go by, but he went forward. So we actually do get a little bit of a glimpse into Moshe, but you're right that we don't know of his entire childhood. And I think one of the reasons why the Torah hides this information is because it's not relevant for our personal lives. What do I mean? Giving that example of Abraham or Moshe, if the Torah told me exactly how Moshe became who he was, then I, Sabzavari, know that the only way that I could become great is if I follow Moshe's footsteps. So if by age 15, I'm not up to where Moshe was by the age of 15, I might say, I blew it. Or if by age 20, I'm not up to where Abraham Avinu was, I might say, no, that's the right way to do it. What happens if someone their entire life wasn't living as a Jew? Later on, he might say, no, look how Abraham's life was. In other words, part of the reason why the Torah conceals the background is because it doesn't matter how you get there. To think that there's only one single way of serving Hashem is not what the Torah wants to convey that lesson. The Torah almost hides the details of how did Moshe become so great, because there is no single way. It doesn't matter how Moshe got there for our personal lives. Our personal lives, we can get there in our own paths, in our own ways, at our own pace, at our own age. This is one of the answers that I've read, that's why the details of how Abraham and how Moshe got there is not relevant, because if it gave us that formula, we might have mistakenly thought like that's the only correct formula, and that's not the case. So that's one of the answers that I read.
Wow.
Follow up?
That's very interesting. Thanks.
Okay. Sounds good, Joey. Is there anyone else? Someone had a question I saw?
Rabbi, it's Josh Namdar here. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, Josh.
I kind of have a comment, not a question, but
Please.
I think it kind of gets overlooked. But there was like, out of the 10 plagues, there was an 11th miracle, and the parsha kind of alludes to it. But I think the most fascinating part of this parsha and last parsha is that Pharaoh didn't kill Moshe. They're their number one powerhouse in the world. Who is to come to the leader of the world and tell him what to do? Like, if it was anybody else, any other nation, any other place and time, that person would be hung on a tree within the hour. Like, forget the next day. So I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot in these two parashiyot.
Yeah, that's a great point. Where I alluded to it earlier, where after the plague of darkness, Pharaoh says, "I don't want to see you anymore, and the next time you come, I'll kill you."
Yeah, it's shocking that it took that long.
Right, like, to your point, why didn't he just kill him? Why did he warn him that he will kill him? And then also, this is already after your nation is destroyed. Why didn't you do it until now? So I think there's perhaps two answers. One answer could be that Paro, the culture of Egypt, it's very possible that the culture of Egypt was not to murder. Why do I say that? Because when the Jewish people were proliferating, they were having a lot of children, and they were growing, and Paro was concerned. What did he do? He said, go into the hospitals and tell the nurses there to kill the child. Or whenever there's a child born, take the child and kill it. Why didn't he just go out in the streets and start killing Jews? Like Hitler. Like, Hitler didn't say, go kill the babies. Hitler went and said, exterminate the Jews. So it's possible to say that Paro acted as a Hitler, but not as with the adults openly, the same way that he would do with the kids. In other words, it's possible that in Egypt, if Paro would have killed Moshe, that would have been a huge blow to his prestige in the eyes of his own people. That's one possibility. I think the real answer you have to take as a baseline is Hashem was protecting him, right? I think you have to accept that answer that Hashem was protecting him, because Hashem says, go speak to Paro. Moshe walks in and Paro kills him. Well, that didn't work. So obviously Hashem protected him. But I think another thing to keep in mind is maybe this was part of Paro's pride. How if I kill him, then maybe it shows that I'm not powerful enough to beat him. Let's say, Josh, you come to me and you say you want to play me a one-on-one in basketball, right? I don't think you could beat me, Josh. So what am I going to do? I'll accept the challenge and, let you have fun. But if I say, no way, I'm not letting you play, and then, and I injure you all of a sudden, it's like, what are you scared? You're scared of? I'm not scared of you. So it could be it was part of the pride when Moshe comes in with Aaron and all of his people are there, and he says, like, let us go. And Paro could take out a gun and say, I'm scared of you. Or he could say, you can't hurt me. You can't do anything. Who do you think you are? So it could be it also played into his pride.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Any last questions in the last minute? No takers? If anyone does have any questions, you can get my phone number and call me, text me, email me, and I would gladly follow up with you during the week. For now, we'll come to a close. Be'ezrat Hashem. See you all next week. I hope you enjoy your Tu B'Shvat, the Chag of the holiday of renewal for you and for all of your families. Be'ezrat Hashem, to renew in good health.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shavua Tov.
Zak Baruch.
Thank you,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.